When you stop contacting her, something far more powerful than words begins to take place. Silence, something we often avoid, becomes the loudest statement you can make. You see, when you step back, when you choose not to call, not to text, not to chase, you're not just removing communication, you're shifting energy. You're breaking the pattern, you're removing the emotional safety net she was depending on, even if she didn't acknowledge it out loud. Because here's the truth, people only reflect when the noise stops. When you're no longer there feeding her ego, affirming her beauty, or being the predictable good man who shows up without fail, she is left with herself. And for the first time, she has to consider your absence. And that absence, that void, is louder than 1,000 words. Most people don't understand this, especially those who are emotionally invested. They believe constant contact means effort, means love, means value. But it can also mean desperation. It can mean fear of being forgotten, of being replaced, of losing someone who may not even be choosing you. And in that fear, we often overextend ourselves, give too much of our time, attention, and energy to someone who hasn't earned the right to keep it. But when you finally stop, when you take your energy back, the silence speaks louder than any argument or plea could. That's when the shift begins. She will start to notice, not right away perhaps, but slowly. At first, it's just a missing ping on her phone. Then it becomes an empty inbox, no stories reacted to, no messages asking how her day went, no familiar good morning text she never had to ask for. And in that growing quiet, something deeper begins to echo, your absence, and absence doesn't just whisper. It screams, it makes her question everything, not just about you, but about herself, about what she lost, about what she ignored, about what she never fully appreciated. And that's the moment clarity starts to rise. What happens next depends on the foundation you laid. If you were kind, authentic, present, your silence will feel like loss to her. Real loss. It will interrupt her routine. It will interrupt her confidence. It will make her ask the one question that fear never lets us face. What if I let something good go? That is where power begins to shift. That is when she starts to look inward, to reflect on what she had, to question why you're not reaching out anymore. And every second you don't, she's wondering more. Every hour you stay silent, she's weighing your worth in her mind, not based on your presence, but based on your absence. You see, space reveals truth. When someone can no longer lean on your presence, they either rise into realization or fall into ignorance. Either way, you find your truth, because people reveal themselves not just by how they treat you when you're giving, but how they react when you stop. If she comes back with respect, clarity, and a different energy, maybe there's something there. If she vanishes, mocks you, or plays games with your silence, you just got confirmation. Confirmation that you were holding up the connection by yourself all along, and that's a blessing. You might not feel it in the beginning, especially if emotions are raw, if the connection was deep, or if you genuinely cared. But that silence you created, it's not distance, it's a filter, a spiritual and emotional filter that separates the ones who want you from the ones who only tolerated you. That silence forces her to reveal who she truly is when you're no longer giving her the stage. And while all this is happening externally, there's a greater shift happening internally inside you. As you stay silent, as you remove your emotional dependency, your clarity grows, your self-worth strengthens. You're not chasing validation anymore, you're creating certainty. You begin to realize that your value isn't proven by how much you fight for someone. Sometimes it's proven by how well you walk away. And in that moment, you're no longer trying to be chosen. You're choosing you, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of growth. Because when you stop contacting her, you give both of you the chance to grow or outgrow. You give space for authenticity to rise. You stop forcing outcomes and start allowing truth. That is when love reveals itself or disappears. And whichever happens, you win, because you either reclaim something real or you release something that was never truly yours. Every time you say yes to something that doesn't align with your vision, your values, or your self-respect, you delay your own progress. And most of the time, people aren't even aware they're doing it. You think you're being kind, agreeable, flexible. But deep down, you're compromising. You're saying yes not from a place of power, but from a place of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of rejection, fear of losing someone who's already halfway out the door. But a yes born in fear always costs more than it gives. It costs you time, energy, and most dangerously, it chips away at your self-trust. Because every time you betray your own instincts, you teach yourself that other people's comfort is more important than your own growth. You begin to build a life that's not really yours, a relationship you're tiptoeing around in, a connection where you feel like you're walking on eggshells. You say yes to another conversation you don't want to have. You say yes to another night out when your heart feels heavy. You say yes to being understood later, when you know damn well you're being dismissed now. And what you don't realize is that every one of those yesies is quietly shaping your destiny. They're small bricks building a wall that blocks the life you actually want. You become stuck in a loop where pleasing others feels like the only way to be seen, valued, or loved. But deep down, you're shrinking. You're becoming resentful. You're frustrated because your needs aren't being met. Yet you keep showing up, giving, adjusting, hoping that someday someone will notice the effort and finally love you right. But they won't, not because you're unworthy, but because you never made them work for your energy. You never made them earn your presence. You gave them the world for free, and now you're shocked they don't value the price. Saying yes to things, to people, to situations that don't align with your truth is one of the most dangerous habits to have. It seems harmless at first. It seems like compromise. But when you compromise too often and too deeply, you begin to lose touch with your real power. And that power isn't loud, it's not aggressive, it's quiet, it whispers, it tells you when something doesn't feel right. It nudges you when your spirit knows you're settling. And when you ignore that voice, again and again, it stops talking. Not because it's wrong, but because it realizes you're not listening. Every time you say yes when your soul is screaming no, you delay the life you were actually meant to live. Because here's what most people don't understand. Your destiny is not some distant place you're going to arrive at one day magically. Your destiny is built decision by decision, day by day, moment by moment. And it's in the moments when you want to say no, but you say yes out of guilt, fear, or insecurity. That's when you trade your future for someone else's comfort. And the most dangerous part, it feels like love, it feels like loyalty, but in truth it's self-abandonment disguised as connection. There comes a point where you have to ask yourself, is this version of me the one that will carry me to the life I want? If you keep saying yes to people who don't reciprocate, to environments that don't challenge you, to relationships that require you to shrink, you already know the answer. You can't live a full life in a state of half approval. You can't build a kingdom while constantly seeking permission to matter. You have to rise. You have to learn that saying no isn't rejection, it's redirection. It's you drawing the line between who you've been and who you're becoming. People will try to convince you that you're selfish, that you've changed, that you're different now. And you are, because you've finally realized that a soft yes to everyone else means a loud no to yourself. And you're not willing to betray yourself anymore. You're not willing to delay your purpose because someone else can't handle your growth. The moment you understand that your time, your attention, and your energy are the currency of your life, you stop spending it on things that give you no return. And you start investing in people, places, and habits that build your legacy. Saying yes out of fear might keep the peace for a moment, but it will never lead you to the life you're supposed to live. It's only when you start honoring your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you approval, that your real destiny begins to unfold. Because clarity lives on the other side of no. Strength lives in the pause before you agree. And alignment, the kind that shifts your entire life, begins the moment you decide your vow. You doesn't depend on how much you can endure, but on how boldly you can walk away from what doesn't align. Your emotions are not the enemy, they were never the problem. What has been the problem is how you've been taught to treat them. From the time you were young, you were told to toughen up, to hide your tears, to mask your sadness with a smile, and to bury your anger deep beneath politeness. You were told that being emotional is weakness, that vulnerability is dangerous, that expressing your inner world would make you look needy, soft, or unstable. So what did you do? You learned to suppress, you learned to fake strength, you learned to feel shame for even having feelings in the first place. But emotions, all of them, are messengers, not mistakes. They arrive to teach, to inform, to warn, to wake you up. That ache in your chest when you're being ignored, that's not just loneliness, it's your soul signaling to you that your needs are not being met. That burst of anger when you feel disrespected, that's not just rage, that's your boundaries screaming for recognition. That anxiety you feel when someone you care about is inconsistent, hot and cold, in and out, that's your nervous system telling you this isn't safe. But instead of listening, we shame ourselves. We say, I shouldn't feel this way, or worse, what's wrong with me? And that self-rejection is more damaging than the original feeling. You cannot heal by hating the parts of yourself that hurt. You cannot grow by pretending you're unaffected. The truth is, the more you suppress what you feel, the more power those emotions gain over your life. They don't disappear. They just hide in your body, in your subconscious, in the quiet moments when you're alone, and the mask falls off. That's when they show up as overthinking, as panic, as emotional shutdown, as reactive behavior you don't even understand. Because unprocessed emotions always find a way to surface. You can either meet them with compassion and curiosity, or you can keep running from them and remain confused by your own reactions. Feelings are not weaknesses, they are feedback. Every emotion carries a frequency, a message, a call to attention. Sadness often invites rest, reflection, or release. Anger reveals where we've been crossed, where we've allowed too much. Fear highlights areas where we need more certainty, more preparation, or deeper trust. Even jealousy is a signal, not of immaturity, but of desire. It points towards something you value that you believe you can't have, and that belief is where the work begins. But society never taught you that emotions are a form of intelligence. You were taught to override them, to analyze them away, to be strong, and get over it. And now you wonder why you feel numb, disconnected, or out of touch with your intuition. That's what happens when you silence your emotional compass. You lose direction. You make decisions from fear, not clarity. You chase people and situations that mimic old wounds because you never learned how to identify and listen to what those wounds were trying to say. The most powerful thing you can do isn't to suppress how you feel, it's to slow down and listen. Not every emotion needs to be fixed. Some need to be felt, held, honored. You can say, I'm sad, without making it your identity. You can feel disappointment without spiraling into despair. The key is to feel it consciously, to observe it, to ask, what are you trying to show me? Because once you understand what your emotions are asking for, you can meet your needs directly instead of seeking people to do it for you. That's where emotional freedom begins. You no longer become a prisoner to someone else's attention or validation to feel okay. You no longer need their apology to find your peace. You stop reacting to every trigger because you start recognizing the root. Most of the pain you experience in relationships doesn't come from the other person's actions alone. It comes from what those actions awaken inside of you. Old wounds, childhood patterns, forgotten memories of being left, ignored, criticized. When you stop blaming and start understanding, you reclaim your power. Emotional mastery isn't about not feeling. It's about becoming the observer of your feelings rather than the victim of them. It's about allowing space between the emotion and the reaction. It's about letting your inner world speak and having the courage to hear what it has to say, even when it's uncomfortable. Because growth doesn't come from pretending to be unaffected. It comes from sitting with what hurts until it no longer controls you. That is strength, that is healing, that is the foundation of inner transformation. And the beautiful truth is this: the moment you begin honoring your emotions instead of judging them, they begin to work for you, not against you. They guide your boundaries, they teach you about your unmet needs, they steer you away from what harms and towards what heals. They help you choose people who recognize your depth instead of those who fear it. Your emotions are not liabilities, they are gifts. Gifts that lead you back to yourself. The power to walk away is not about ego, not about proving a point, and not about playing games. It's about realizing that your peace, your self-worth, and your emotional well-being are not negotiable. When you walk away from a situation that drains you, from a woman who gives you mixed signals, from conversations that go in circles, you are not giving up, you are choosing yourself. And that is one of the most difficult but transformational decisions a person can ever make. Because everything in you will want to stay. Everything in you will want to hold on, to fix, to understand, to be understood. But when you've done your part, when you've been present, loyal, available, consistent, and it's still not enough, the strongest thing you can do is leave. You don't walk away to get a reaction. You don't walk away so they come running back. You walk away because the energy is no longer mutual. Because the connection is no longer feeding you. Because you're constantly questioning your place in someone's life, and that is not a question you should ever have to ask. Love, at its core, should feel safe, not perfect, not always easy, but safe. And when it doesn't, you owe it to yourself to stop begging for clarity from someone who thrives in your confusion. You begin to understand that the moment you walk away with dignity, you're sending a message not just to her, but to your own subconscious. You're declaring, I matter, my feelings matter, my time is valuable. You stop handing out emotional access to someone who doesn't recognize the depth of what you bring. And whether she realizes it now or later, or never, that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to stay aligned with your truth. And sometimes that means choosing silence over explanation, distance over desperation, peace over proof. Most people are afraid to walk away because they confuse loneliness with failure. They believe staying is strength and leaving is weakness. But real weakness is staying in a place that makes you doubt yourself every day. Real weakness is abandoning your own needs to secure someone else's presence. When you walk away, yes, there may be silence. Yes, there may be nights that feel longer, but there will also be clarity. There will be space for your energy to reset, for your standards to rise, for your soul to breathe again. And you start to see yourself differently. You look in the mirror and recognize the version of you who refused to tolerate inconsistency, who no longer accepted breadcrumbs, who didn't beg for love that should have been given freely. That man, the one who walked away, is a man stepping into his power, because he's no longer afraid to be alone with himself. He no longer needs her validation to feel worthy. He trusts that what's meant for him will stay, not because he begged, but because he became someone it couldn't afford to lose. It's in the walking away that your energy shifts, the uncertainty disappears, the begging stops, and she will feel that. Whether she admits it or not, she will feel the difference when your energy is no longer orbiting her. When she checks her phone and sees nothing, when your name doesn't appear in her notifications, when your eyes don't look for her across the room anymore. She will feel the silence, the gap, the space where your presence used to live, and in that space, her own clarity will start to rise. Because people don't often see what they had until it's gone, until they feel the weight of what was once there, now vanished. But you didn't leave to teach her a lesson. You left because staying was teaching you one. You realized that love isn't proven by how long you hold on, but sometimes by how deeply you can let go. By how firmly you can walk away from what hurts, even when your heart wants to stay. And when you do, when you stop reaching out, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop hoping she'll change, that's when something inside you changes. That's when the desperation fades, the fog lifts, and you begin to see yourself as you truly are. Not someone who wasn't enough, but someone who gave too much to someone who wasn't ready. That shift becomes your power. You don't chase, you don't beg, you don't prove, you let go, and in that letting go, something miraculous happens. You rise. You rise into a new level of self-awareness, of confidence, of peace. You stop performing and start living. You stop waiting and start moving. You stop looking back and start focusing forward. That's what the power to walk away does. It's not an ending, it's a beginning. A quiet revolution inside you that says, I will never again trade my peace for temporary comfort. It says, I choose me. Rejection, silence, and distance often feel like endings. They hit you in the chest, unexpected and heavy, especially when you've poured your heart into someone who now seems to vanish without explanation. The silence burns, not because of the words left unsaid, but because of the meaning you assign to that silence. You think you're not enough, you think something is wrong with you. You replay every message, every moment, every interaction, trying to spot the flaw, trying to figure out what you missed. But what you're not realizing in that very moment is that what feels like a painful ending is actually the opening chapter of your rebirth. Distance doesn't mean you're being abandoned, it means you're being redirected. Silence isn't always a punishment, sometimes it's a pause, a necessary space where truth can echo louder than noise ever could. When someone stops choosing you, when their energy fades, when their presence shrinks, they're giving you something, freedom. It doesn't feel like a gift at first, it feels like betrayal, but if you can stay present through the discomfort, you'll see what's really happening. You're being given a chance to see the truth without distractions. You're being given an opportunity to stop chasing and start listening, not to them, but to yourself. Rejection is not always personal. It often has more to do with where they are in life than with who you are. But because we're emotional beings, we internalize everything. We believe their departure is a direct reflection of our worth. But it's not. Sometimes, rejection is simply the universe stepping in and removing what was never aligned with your future. Sometimes, silence is the space you need to realize how loud your inner voice has been screaming that this isn't for you. And sometimes, distance is the only way you'll finally get close to yourself again. Most people stay stuck in cycles of pain because they never allow space for transformation. They interpret distance as danger, as loss, and they panic, rushing to fix, to reconnect, to restore. But in doing so, they miss the real message. Not everything broken is meant to be repaired. Not every person who leaves is meant to return. Some connections come into your life to reveal what you still need to heal. Some people act as mirrors, reflecting your insecurities, your fears, your childhood wounds. And when they disappear, it's not your world falling apart, it's the illusion shattering. It's easy to think that healing happens when things get better. But true healing often begins when things fall apart, when you're left alone in your own silence, when the person you thought you needed walks away, when the conversations stop and you're forced to face the parts of yourself you've been ignoring. That's when growth begins. When you stop trying to bring them back and start asking yourself, why was I afraid to let them go? When you stop blaming them for leaving and start examining why you kept trying to hold on. Rejection, silence, and distance are not punishments. They are the fire that burns away your illusions. They strip you of false hope and make space for truth. They teach you who you are when no one is clapping, when no one is checking in, when no one is affirming your value. And in that raw, uncomfortable space, you meet yourself. You meet the parts of you that survived what you thought would break you. You meet the strength that doesn't scream but stands firm. You meet your own resilience. That's when you realize something powerful. You don't need their attention to validate your worth. You don't need their return to prove you're lovable. You don't need their explanations to find peace. What you needed was the distance to come back home to yourself, to remember that your identity was never meant to be built around someone else's presence, that your destiny doesn't rely on who stays, but on who you become in their absence. And when you finally grasp that, everything shifts. You stop begging for closure. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop needing someone to make it right. Because you realize you're already becoming whole again, not because of them, but because of you, you learn to sit with silence and not panic. You learn to walk through rejection and not collapse. You learn to embrace distance and use it to rebuild your vision, your purpose, your self-respect. Every person who leaves, every moment of silence, every ounce of distance, it's all a teacher, not of loss, but of liberation. Not of pain, but of potential. You just have to be willing to see it that way. You just have to stop resisting the lessons and start receiving them. Because what once felt like a door slamming shut is often just the universe guiding you to a door you never knew existed. And through that door, you walk into the version of yourself that no longer settles, no longer begs, no longer breaks for love that was never whole to begin with.